Hi, and welcome to today's webinar, Beyond Burnout, Proactive Tips for Building a Resilient Workforce. I'm Chris Capon, Distribution Director here at Westfield Health. And in my current role, I wear many hats. I have responsibility for many different functions. So today's topic has a personal meaning for me. But today we're joined by Mark.
Hi everyone, very good afternoon to you. So I'm Mark Pinches, I'm a psychologist and performance coach, and I'm head of coaching here at Westfield Health.
And we're joined by Richard too.
Yes, hi everyone. So my name is Richard Krytowycz. I'm a senior clinical development manager for Health Assured, and we are proud to partner with Westfield Health to provide 24/7 advice online service as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Before we hear anything further from Richard and Mark, got that wonderful housekeeping segment to cover off first of all. The webinar is live, so hopefully there won't be any technical difficulties today, but it is being recorded and you will receive a copy of the recording via email once the webinar ends. You've been joined in listen only mode, so if you do have any questions, please put them into the questions box and we'll try and answer as many of those as we possibly can during the course of the webinar. You should see the questions box on your screen there. You'll see some resources that you can download and use. They're in the handout sections, and they include some items around stress management resources for managers and how they can support employees. And during the webinar, we will be taking a poll too. It's not compulsory, but we would like your feedback. It will be totally anonymous, but we will be sharing the overall results. And it's kind of a good way to learn from your peers as well. So if you can take part in that, we would appreciate it. And at the end of the webinar, a survey will appear. And again, we'd appreciate your input into the survey. That helps us develop the content for future webinars, etc., as we go forward. So that's the housekeeping done. What brings us together today? So as I look at the latest Health and Safety Executive's most recent report, there's an estimated 875,000 cases of work-related stress, depression or anxiety in the year 22-23. And these rates are higher than the pre-pandemic levels and still appear to be on the rise. But why is that the case? What can we do to help manage our employees and the levels of stress at work? Well, today's webinar, we're going to explore these key themes. We're going to be looking at, what we can do as actionable advice for you. We're going to be looking at some real world examples to help you lead your teams towards resilience. And our expert panel of Mark and Richard are going to help us to look at some practical tools to create that workplace of a resilient workforce. What we hope you'll learn during the course of the webinar is why stress is on the rise, what the signs of employee burnout could be and how do we spot them, and why fostering that culture of workplace well-being is important and how we can reduce that workplace stress and how to build that resilient workforce so teams can tackle stress in their own right. So, Richard, Mark, before we get into beyond the burnout, I think maybe it's important that we understand what burnout is in its own right. If you could just give us a little bit of background around that, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Well, it's complex, but let's try and make it as simple as we can. So in a nutshell, burnout describes a state of mental, physical and emotional tiredness or exhaustion. It sort of means we're out of sync with ourselves. There's a natural ebb and flow of the way that we should be. And it means that we're on attendance all the time. We're always ready to respond. And it makes us tired and it runs our energy out. It can happen as a result of the stuff that's going on in work. It can happen as a result of the stuff that's happening in life as a whole. And generally speaking, a bit of a combination of the two. Long hours, chronic fatigue, low energy is pretty much what burnout's about. But just to set the scene on something which I think is important, we're pretty resilient as a species. One of the things that we find that if we look at previous research on this for a long time, it's actually suggesting that we don't actually get burnout because of overwork. One of the things that's been brought into it recently is the fact that there's a lot of associated with the relevance of that work. Are we being recognized? Are we actually working hard and finding that it's being rewarded? That can lead to burnout if we don't get the recognition. So an interesting thing worth bringing in right at the beginning, actually.
Thanks, Mark. Richard, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, when it comes to burnout, it's essentially caused by excessive or prolonged stress and pressure, and it's important to note really that when it comes to burnout, it's not something that will necessarily dissipate on its own. You know, if those underlying issues aren't actually addressed, and that's what's really important. It's having that preventative support and strategies in place, but then also making sure really that we do everything we can to address and address the stresses that may be causing the said burnout as well.
Yeah, important stuff. So as prevalent as it is, gents, burnout's often misunderstood. It kind of gets stigmatized, but it's costly to both the employee's health and well-being and the employer's overall productivity. It's also worth mentioning that the cost of burnout to the economy alone peaked at approximately 28 billion in 2023, and apparently that's costing the government more than Brexit. I mean, Richard, Mark, what do you think about those figures?
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. You know, unfortunately, that that's the impact that it can have. And I mean, speaking from Health Assure's perspective, we've seen a significant increase in calls whereby financial drivers, for instance, are at the core. And again, those stresses. So you know, if they're not resolved and addressed, then again, it can lead to that burnout. In particular, legal support, so practical support, we've actually seen a 30% increase for 2023. And also from a more relationship perspective as well. So we are seeing that households are being impacted as well on the whole. And you know, for instance, partner-related calls are actually third for last year overall, and divorce and separation calls are actually second. So yeah, I think it's quite clear that again, when it comes to some of the many factors around why we're seeing the prevalence of burnout, certainly I'd say that the financial pressures that households are under are definitely a factor from what we're seeing.
So it's not just a workplace issue that we're seeing, it's the environment that's surrounding the employees themselves.
Absolutely.
Mark, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean that cost, you know, to the economy is staggering, you know, and you know, what could we do if we could get a little bit of that back into productivity and engagement? So there is a cost. It says we have to address it. The cost, when we look at it in an economical sense, is large. But what about the cost to individuals? What about the cost to you know, not feeling fulfilled? You know, we're seeing concepts like quiet quitting. You know, people just doing the minimum, people going in and not being part of that organisation's productivity and making a change to the bottom line. So that's worrying enough. But you know, what about us as a species that's developed and to be resilient, to move onwards and upwards and to grow, and having a sense of purpose and feeling a balance in life? If we're feeling underwhelmed or overwhelmed, but underwhelmed in, you know, our engagement with life, the cost of that is huge. What's it doing overall for our well-being? There's so much merit in looking right across the board at addressing this. There really is. Yeah.
That's an interesting concept, the balance of underwhelmed versus overwhelmed there, Mark.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, you know, if we're experiencing these concepts like quiet quitting, we're spending the bulk of our waking hours in this place we call work. You know, many of us working from home. Yes, there's a lot of people working out there in businesses, but for that daylight hour when I'm wanting to contribute and find my sense of purpose, to actually feel that, you know, I haven't got the energy to engage fully, is going to have a whole knock-on effect when it comes to our physical and our mental health. So yeah, it's feeling like we're not quite getting there. It's hard work. It's like wading through treacle. We're making a bit of progress, but it's hard work, and it needs addressing. Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you both for your views on the topic so far. But I think it's now time, a good point to get the views of our audience members and see what they think, what their opinions are, and you know what they think about the cause of stress and burnout are within their organisation. So we're going to launch a poll now. Please participate if you can. Would like to understand what has been the biggest contributor to burnout in your company. And if you have some additional comments or points which aren't one of the options there, please post them in the questions section. So is it around job security, the company's culture, high or mismanaged workloads, external pressures such as uncertainty, cost of living crisis, or another? As I say, post your comments into the questions box, and we'll give everyone just a moment or so to complete the poll, and hopefully we will get a good response. And if we can just wrap that up in 10 seconds or so, that would be great. And we will close the poll. Thank you very much. So as we wait for the results to come through, and the results have come through, some interesting results there, gents. Would you like to share your thoughts on what we're seeing there in the poll?
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. Look, high or mismanaged workloads, where's all this idea of us working smarter, not harder? I think the fact that we're connected to the world for a much larger proportion of our 24 hours now means that there's a lot of incoming information, and the danger is, how do we choose? How do we prioritize? How do we know what we should be focusing our attention on to get the best return on investment of our energy and our time? If we're having mismanaged workloads and we're being, dare I say, busy fools, then that's not good for us as individuals, and it's not good for our organizations who want to streamline and work smarter. So it's interesting how the view there, puts a huge emphasis on that. I mean, that's quite a significant increase compared to some of the others. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Richard?
Yeah, again, it's certainly going to be a factor as well, and in terms of, like you say, managing the workload, so to speak, and on a day-to-day perspective, but also recognizing as well the difference that I guess technology has made, and the world that we live in now post-pandemic, and all the changes that have happened there. So we are kind of, I guess, working differently, and there are many benefits of what's happened. We're here today, for instance, doing this virtually, but there are potential ramifications as well when it comes to personal boundaries and that kind of thing, and always being available. I guess that's kind of what with all these many work streams that we have now, particularly in the office environment, there can be there's so many different ways in which you can be receiving information.
Yeah, and a few interesting comments put into the boxes there. So we're getting comments through about toxic work culture, poor leadership, understaffing, fast pace.
Yeah,
all of those resonate too.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the pace of life has increased. There's no doubt. We're moving faster. We're expected to respond to information quicker because we can. When I started working, I used to write things onto a piece of paper with a pen, and it used to go to a typing pool, and eventually it came back. And all of a sudden, I can have a great idea, and the world can see it in a few minutes, or a few seconds almost. So I think the speed, the pace of life has increased dramatically. And on that basis, I think we're all stumbling over ourselves in a way. We're going too fast. There's still 24 hours in a day. There's still this need to ebb and flow between rest states and to take lunches and do all the things that we used to do. I think that the speed of life has had a huge impact just because we're connected. Progress is supposed to be related to Moore's law, isn't it? This is the power of our microchip doubling its speed and capacity every few months. Still 24 hours in a day.
Thanks for that, Mark. And when we look at both stress and burnout, a key driver of burnout is the existence of that chronic imbalance between situational demands and the capacity to cope with those demands. And I do know this is a broad topic, but what do you guys feel is the primary factors creating that imbalance in the work environment? Richard, maybe you first.
Yeah, again, really, I do believe that we haven't really, I guess, acknowledged the impact that the impact of the pandemic and the way the world has changed, and also the working world has changed as well. So as Mark said, we're living in a world now where we're always connected, whether that's in the workplace, but then also outside of the workplace as well. And so, again, I feel as though we've maybe you know, we're working in a different way, different environment, but we're still catching up in a lot of ways in terms of how that may impact one's mental health. And speaking for myself, for instance, you know, I was impacted, and there were points where I was working from home, and interesting. One of the things I actually genuinely really missed, which might sound like a strange thing to say, but I actually, when working from home, I actually missed the commute to work and to and from work. And the reason being is that I realised that just how important having that kind of half an hour or so just to kind of debrief, just reflect, just that break in between work and home life. Whereas when working from home, you switch your laptop off, turn around, and it's home's there, which again, don't get me wrong, is great. But it's just recognising again the importance of having those kind of breaks and having that sort of self-care as well.
Yeah, and I call that decompression time, and like you, I missed that commute. I had a 45-minute commute to really decompress from that day, or the commute in to really get ready for the day ahead, so you were in a better frame of mind. Yeah, thanks for that, Richard. Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was almost like a transition period, wasn't it, where you couldn't do what was going on in work and you hadn't got home yet to face those sort of challenges. So in the middle somewhere, you had an opportunity to ebb and move at a slower pace. And I think that ebbing and flowing is something which certainly we look at our ancestors and how, you know, the demands were such that we had to have almost forced slowdown and that transition. Now I can check my emails before I go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night if I want to, and I can check them at 6 o'clock in the morning, you know, if I want to, and I can engage in work. And if I'm thinking about work, I'm actually in work, and you know, that prompt is there. So I think there needs to be a sort of a degree of discipline when it comes to, you know, shutting things off. But that transition was important to us. I mean, you know, if we look at our capacity to cope with high levels of stress, we actually are pretty resilient. You know, our ancestors have given us that capacity, you know, physically and mentally. We have the capacity to avoid burnout. We just have to really look at how the link between what there is as a demand, if you like, as an expectation, and what realistically we can actually do when we're managing not time, but we're managing our energy more. I mean, if we look at our capacity, for example, to perform under pressure, we've got it there. You know, there's absolutely no doubt that we can, when we stretch ourselves, you know, produce more. We prioritize, we can focus on the things that need attention, and maybe just sort of drop and put on the back burner some of those things that don't need our priority. If we say, well, you know, this report's ready, you know, by Friday, well, then I'm going to have to work and prioritize. If the report, you know, is ready when it's finished, it goes down the list a bit, you know, and so priorities and working to deadlines are actually important if we stretch ourselves. But look, we've got a tipping point, and this pressure performance curve that you can see at the moment is quite significant, because what happens is there are signs and symptoms when we get towards that tipping point, which incidentally is skewed over to the right-hand side. It's not an equal distribution curve. It's suggesting we can probably be a little bit higher performing and a bit more resilient than we give ourselves credit to sometimes. But the tipping point is quite fine when we get to that point where our coping capability starts to reduce. And look what happens. We go into strain, we go into panic, our body shuts down when it comes to the sort of meeting the demands and the expectations. And that's when, you know, if you juggle 4 balls very successfully and someone says, can you juggle 5? If you can't juggle the 5th one, you drop all the other 4 as well. So the idea is performance tails off very, very, very quickly. This secret must be to navigate that pressure performance curve and know when we're stretching, you know when we can come back into that comfort zone, and to be able to understand what we need to do to recharge the batteries. You know, it's very much aligned with this, what we were talking about earlier on, pace, and we have a natural pace. That pace, if we know it, means that we can take our foot off the gas. You know, the analogy perhaps this year that we're driving with our foot on the brake and the accelerator at the same time, and you know, the system is working over time, and it's not aligned to our natural sort of cycles and our ebbing and flowing, which is something that starts in our brain. You know, it says there's a chronotype, a time when we're better at doing these things. We're more creative. We can choose what to focus on when we are actually more relaxed. So we've got to build that into our day to deal with burnout, most definitely.
I really like that pressure performance curve, Mark, and I think it brings us nicely to something else I'd like to explore with you guys, and that's how do we spot the signs if somebody's going along that curve? How do we actually spot those signs of burnout, regardless of what area an individual works within? And I recall the recent Mental Health UK survey. They reported that half of the people they surveyed in 2024 in their burnout report says that the employer does not have a plan in place to spot people who are dealing with chronic stress. And some of those common signs of burnout being put down as feeling tired and drained most of the time, feeling detached or alone, having cynical or a negative outlook on life in general, feeling overwhelmed. So gents, what do you think this looks like in the workplace, spotting those signs? Richard?
Yeah, I mean, typically on an individual basis, you will see as a result of burnout, you will see team members disengage, withdraw. They may become more sensitive to feedback, maybe, and may, again, may not necessarily have an interest in the company on the whole, or indeed their team. But I do think it's really important to recognise as well that individual differences do come into play here, and what's the norm for me may be very different for you guys, for instance. And so actually really the importance of the manager or the managing team to have that understanding of the team and the individuals as well. So what is the norm for them, and then only then really when you can understand the person and individual, that's when you can then really see and identify if there are any sudden differences or that kind of thing. But again, it's really important as well. Given that we all work in different ways now in terms of working from home, hybrid, or indeed in the office, it's again having those touch points as well with managers and having those lines of communication. So even though we do live and work in a very active world, and in that respect, and it can be fast paced, it's having that structure in place as well, so people still have the opportunity to speak up really if they are struggling.
So it's less about one size fits all, and it's about the individual, understanding the individual and spotting the signs within the individual.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely. The signs are there most definitely, and I think if we slow down, if we listen, if we take time to get to know people and have a psychologically safe culture, for want of a better term, to make sure that people are able to express themselves and say how they feel, we're only going to do it if we ask them, then I think those signs become more apparent. So there's definitely a sign that happens in terms of the what we see, but the signs also need to be identified by the individual. And I think when we slow down, we actually, as Socrates suggested a few thousand years ago, above all, know thyself. It's to know what the signs and symptoms are as we start to get towards our tipping point, to fight through it and to hope that we just keep our fingers crossed and, get through it. It's not good enough if we're going to actually overtax ourselves. So, when the body's faced with stressors, they are invigorating, and quite often they will give us the stimulus to move onwards and upwards through fight or flight. But, that's eustress, which is very useful. But if we look at distress, it means we're stuck in that responding mode for too long. It's a sympathetic nervous system over responding by producing cortisol and adrenaline, and that's the stuff that keeps us up at night. We have an ideal performance state and a recovery state that needs to be adhered to. We need to align with it. There's a very definite ebbing and flowing of when we're good at performing and when we should be recovering. So the signs are there, but above all, know ourselves, and to slow down, we become more introspective. It's the answers are there, but we do need to look out for each other as well.
And I've heard you speak previously, Mark, and you talk about the elastic band. Elastic band can stretch and stretch, but it becomes useless if it stays in that stress state for a long period of time. It has to come back to its normal shape, recover, and then can go again. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've got this quest to delete stress from our vocabulary and insert the word stretch, because I think it would cover every situation. It's not a mental health condition, by the way, stress. It's an engineering or a physics term. But the elastic band analogy is good. It's very useful when we stretch it, but we need to rest it. We need to bring it down into its more natural, relaxed state, just like us. We actually work in rhythms where the body's wanting us to do that every so often,
Yeah. So if we turn our minds to fostering the culture of well-being and how we can reduce that workplace stress, as we say, Mark, we look at our research and that shows that the vast majority, or 86% of employees, say they're more productive at work if there's a good culture, which is what we had in the audience feedback earlier. And 85% say there's a link between workplace culture and well-being. And Forbes said that there was a 4 times increase in revenue growth in organizations with a strong culture. So we're seeing culture coming through from the audience members today, putting that in the chat box. And we're hearing it in our research, Forbes research as well. So in your view, Jen, how does fostering that culture of well-being reduce workplace stress? Richard?
Yeah. I think boundaries, so having a good work-life balance, and supporting with that within the workplace as well. So having robust policies, having a great awareness of that as well, so across the board. So that really does need to be endorsed by senior leadership and throughout the whole company in that respect, and having that. You mentioned earlier, Mark, the psychological safety, individuals being able to feel comfortable to talk about mental health. And although it'll be, speaking for myself, I've seen over the years, particularly as a result of the pandemic, I think we've become a lot more aware of the importance of mental health, and certainly in the workplace as well, and the role of the workplace within that. But there's still a long way to go. And yeah, I'd also say, ensuring that there's a good well-being program, and again that there is a great awareness of exactly what that offers. So whether that is in the AP, for instance, exactly what is available, how the support can be accessed as well. It can certainly help with again. It's looking at it more from a preventative though as well, and again looking at the importance of having the leadership there as well, so managers being aware of that as well.
Okay, and Mark, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask for a really concise answer from you on this one, please.
Yeah, well, none of us are as strong as all of us. It's a team effort here, and the idea is that if we have a culture that supports well-being and supports individual needs, together we'll be a lot stronger. But we have to communicate it. We have to listen. We have to have initiatives that are going to allow us to be able to do what comes natural as well. And I think at the end of the day, we're designed as a stand-up moving creature, not a sitting down in front of screen creature. We'll be very efficient, yes, for a period of time, but then burnout is going to be highly probable, and potential will happen if we are not using our bodies in the way intended. So we need to move more. We need to sit less. We need to have creative ways to get our body moving and using energy while we're in work, so that we're able to actually do what comes naturally. Our ancestors were hunter-gatherers for thousands of years. We're only recently sitting down. We've got to do the well-being movement thing. And I think that will make a difference because our body recognizes that as being natural and effective. Yeah.
And I think that brings us nicely to another area to explore here, because we recently posted a blog article which was questioning the relevance of consumer wellness trends in the workplace and how these can impact our experiences at work. And we concluded that despite the allure of these health hacks, I will put that in inverted commas, rushing into those large-scale investments of ice baths in the office or a suite of nap pods, the latest gym equipment, probably unlikely to have a lasting impact on employee well-being. So for some, yeah, in life, ice baths may make a difference, but how do we do this across an entire workforce?
It's horses for courses. We're all different, and we're all going to get very different things out of our engagement in a physical way. But it doesn't have to be that those who are already working at a high level of physical, health, for example, when it comes to fitness, etc., are going to be the only ones to benefit. If they carry on doing what they're doing, then that's that end of the bell curve, which is taking care of themselves. How do we engage the majority of people? And it's simple sometimes as walking, simple as being able to take some time out just to be. You know, we see huge increase in things like mindfulness in the workplace as being great productive tools, but it's just doing what comes naturally, and that's allow the body just to recharge the batteries. So I think there are initiatives. I think there are some things which will, be great for some people, and let's embrace those and carry on with them, and maybe we'll all work up to having those lunchtime jogs, a nice bath. But it's about just moving more. It's about understanding our bodies and what they're actually asking. It's about doing the basics right when it comes to things like eating healthy foods, a reduction in highly processed and ultra processed foods, teaching people how to sleep well, all the things that are actually going to help us prevent burnout. It's about managing our energy. It's perhaps, as a bottom line here, should we be managing our time or managing our energy? If we've got the world taking our energy reserves away from us, what are we doing each day to put it back? If it's like a bank account and there are more deposits than withdrawals, then the account's healthy. If we've got everything taking our energy away from us, we need to be able to find out what puts energy in, and movement and health and well-being, in whichever way it's going to be relevant for that individual. If they feel energized, then they have the capacity to deal with the things that come their way, the stretches, and the rest and recovery happens naturally. Energy management rather than time management, maybe.
Richard?
Yeah, I've not tried an ice bath myself. I've had a cold shower and that was enough. But I mean, there's so much we can do, and I certainly do agree as well, Mark. It is looking at it from a human individual perspective in terms of what works for them. But yeah, that general awareness again from a mental health perspective, and having training in place. So you mentioned, for instance, all the things that you can do to prevent burnout from happening. So that that could be, like you say, sleep hygiene and really understanding the importance of sleep. It is something that generally people are aware of, but actually when there's a lot of new research out there now, and actually the amount of the impact that even just an hour less a night can have on individuals, and again in terms of looking at that capacity to deal with life and having that resilience to deal with life is so important. So yeah, sleep hygiene, but also I'd say I touched on it before, but Health Assured, we are having a big focus on the managers and the role they play, and supporting managers in their role to then in turn support the employees. And again, we're seeing managers that are having being challenged, having really difficult conversations, mental health concerns that may be outside of their knowledge and and experience as well. So so again, it's there's a big focus as well on making sure that we support managers to again support the team there as well. And with Health Assured, we have seen an increase as well when it comes to the management coaching that we provide as well. So that's something that we are going to be certainly focusing on for 2024 and beyond.
Beautiful, yeah. And I think one thing to add into that, Richard, yeah, it's important to support the managers, to support the employees as well, but we need to empower the managers to know themselves and have that release valve for themselves too. They can't take the whole world on their shoulder, so that's really important too.
Yeah, it's something we do see unfortunately quite a lot, because like you say, managers can be so focused on the team, can't they, and yet they within that they can forget about themselves. So absolutely making sure that there is that care there. And I just want to touch on briefly as well, just within the workplace, I know there are limitations, but it's actually giving employees control, and as much control as possible. There can be a lack of agency within the workplace, so making sure that you involve staff in terms of these policies, procedures, that kind of thing, gain that feedback. So that could be obtained via surveys, or it could be steering groups, that kind of thing. But really important, and also we are seeing an increase in mental health champions as well within the workplace. So that's they're playing a very important part. Again, making sure that there is that awareness and people have someone they can speak to.
Great, thanks for that. I just want to turn to some questions we've had from the audience members, if you'd be so kind, Jen. So first one is, there are so many more pressures than just work. So how do we prioritise when they are coming from different areas? How do we manage all of this without tipping over the stress curve? Who would like to take that?
You know, I mean, it's absolutely right. I mean, we've talked a lot about the work environment, but of course, you know, we're engaged with life outside work for long periods, and it's pressured, you know, with cost of living crises and things that are happening at the moment, and have been for some time. You know, it might well be that we see work as the sanctuary, the place that we go to. It's home and stuff outside, which is the problem. It all boils down to our coping capability and our ability to build resilience generally. So I think when we look at well-being as a central focus as to how we can, you know, manage our energy better, how we can build our resilience, it's going to be a measure that's going to be useful for us in life in general. You know, we can't, as we talked about earlier on, distinguish sometimes these sort of hybrid working models, etc. You know, where we actually are. Is it home? Is it pressures from home? Is it pressures from life in general? Is it they're pressures are pressures? We can deal with stressors in the same way, and that starts with us actually looking at them and understanding what we should be putting our energy into to be able to change our view. We always have a choice as to how we react to the circumstances that we're in, and if we have a focus which is valued, which is focused on our values, what we believe is important, we have a sense of purpose, that we take time out to put those values foremost in our minds as regard to our priorities, then I think, you know, any initiative when it comes to a well-being focus is going to be good for us wherever those pressures come from. You know, we can't change some of those focus, you know, areas, those stressors outside work, you know, the economy and the cost of living crisis. We can't do things about that. We can change the way that we look at those things, and we can educate ourselves when it comes to our response. And there's always a choice. There's always a different way to look at things. And I think being open and creative in our minds to look at things differently is a good start point. So it's a good point. You know, they come from many sources, but it's still the same response in ourselves, and nobody's in our heads making decisions for us and making choices other than ourselves.
I think it just to touch on that. Sorry, I think it is a really important point, and one of the things that we typically see when it comes to the advice line being used and engaged when it comes to counselling is that it's work and life that's being impacted. So you know, we can sometimes deal with the work if there are pressures there, or indeed home life, but when it's both and there's no kind of you know, reprieve or respite from it, then that's when you can start to see. But it is looking at what you can control. So first of all, acknowledging it, but then looking at, you know, as Mark said, there are certain things that we can't control, that are outside of control, but there are always things that we can do, even if they are relatively small steps. And exercise, for instance, is absolutely key to it all, really.
Just going to take one more question from the audience. It's an interesting one. How can I best influence those higher up in the organisation who simply do not switch off and work excessive hours? And I really do fear for their health sometimes. So a really caring contribution there, but it's a genuine question. How do we manage that upward cycle?
Yeah, where to begin? I mean, that's difficult, isn't it, really? I mean, I suppose that highlights the importance of what we were talking about earlier around, you know, having good practice when it comes to work-life balance, and that being, you know, starting that from the very top, and so that everyone can work in that way. But yeah, it is a difficult situation in that respect, and I guess though the only thing that you can do within that is to make sure that you yourself, you know, again, looking at what you can control, there are elements you can't control, but I would be looking at yourself really in terms of what you can do within your own capacity to manage that and manage your own workload, really. And again, you would in turn then be setting an example, wouldn't you, in that respect? So in terms of what good practice is within the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, this is not easy. You know, if it was easy, this session, the fact is that we're in a transitional time now. We're going through a phase which we've never experienced before with this pace of life and with post-pandemic, etc. It's a unique time that we're actually facing. The solutions come when we sit down and we talk and we open up and we're open and we use some emotional intelligence to find ways forward. And we've got a fantastic resource. You know, our species as a surviving species has been on planet Earth for a couple of 100,000 years at least, you know, and we know that we get through, we are resilient, but we spend a lot of time sitting around campfires and we spend a lot of time talking and listening and finding solutions with that creative side of our brain. And maybe we're in one of those times. You know, maybe the speed, going faster, finding, you know, solutions in our, you know, from our screens are a way that are useful, but then maybe not getting to the root of our change potential that we have to do things in a smarter way. And it starts with something that we have as a great strength of the species, that we can open up and talk, and we have a degree of emotional intelligence. We can be motivated by our feelings. You know, that's absolutely key. Emotional intelligence, our EQ, is 4 times better predictor of success in a social environment than IQ. You know, and yet how many of us know our EQ?
EQ,
You know,
sorry, Mark. Just conscious of time, and I think we've got a really good question here. I'd appreciate your views on. So, one tip. What one tip would you offer for colleagues who are feeling the strain of high demand working environments, but due to resource constraints aren't able to reduce their workloads? Briefest answer possible, Richard.
Again, I sound like I'm repeating myself, but again, it's looking at what you can do within your own, you know, what you control, what you can influence in terms of managing your own work-life balance. So again, it's recognizing as a whole as well. So, you know, for instance, there might not be as much, you know, much that you can influence within the workplace, but then it's recognizing what you can do outside of that as well. So, you know, having good healthy habits in that respect, so nutrition, sleep, exercise, that kind of thing. So it's replenishing, as Mark said, it's that energy reserve, isn't it? It's replenishing that, really.
Yeah, it's focusing on the basics, getting the basics right first will create a foundation here. You know, the one thing, if it's one answer for this one, because I know we're short of time, Chris, you know, apply the 80-20 rule. You know, 80% of the effect comes from 20% of the right input, but we have to choose the right 20%, and that comes from our creativity. You know, we get a much better effect if we focus on the things that give us more leverage. And I think a well-being focus gives us leverage to work smarter. So focusing on the right things, that's the way to handle big workloads. You know, dare I say, is there really that much of a workload for everybody that they have to spend, you know, huge hours? The return from that will be less if we're not energized. So focus on priorities. Where am I going to get the best return on investment of my energy? That's where to focus on.
Beautiful. We're going to show a slide now of the key takeaways. We hope the audience members have got from the discussion today. But while that's being displayed, Mark, what would be your one key takeaway you'd like the audience members to take away from today?
Well, you know, I think perhaps the need to remind ourselves every so often that we've come from a success story. We're a successful species, and the way that our ancestors became successful was to ebb and flow between recovery and performance states. We can't be performing all the time. We work in 90-minute cycles, interestingly enough. Everyone said of circadian rhythms of 24 hours, but there are ultradian rhythms of 90-minute cycles. Halfway through a 90-minute cycle, your body's saying, take your foot off the gas, slow down, use the other side of your brain to be more creative about what you've just learned and what you now need to apply that learning in to be efficient in the next 45 minutes. You know, ebbing and flowing, that's what we need to build into the day. Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in having boundaries, essentially. So the importance of boundaries, and again, in personal boundaries, but also in the workplace as well, in that respect, and keeping to them. But I would say as well, just touching on how fast-paced life is, it is also just taking a step back, if you can, and just looking at what you can influence, what you can change, what one small change you can make, for instance, that again, you know, can lead to that increase in resilience.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Really enjoyed the discussion. As ever, time is an enemy, and it's not our friend today. We could have had that chat for a long time, but really have valued your expertise, your opinion, your views today. So thank you very much for that. Thank you also to the audience for joining us today. We hope you got some real takeaways out of that. Sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but we will try and post a series of follow-up blogs answering as many of those questions and the common themes that we possibly can. Don't forget to download your handouts, which you'll find out in the handout section on your screen there. And there will be a survey at the end, which I mentioned earlier. We would appreciate you taking time to complete that survey. It does genuinely help us then build content for future webinars and make sure that they're of value to you. Also, after the webinar closes, shortly afterwards, you will receive a recording via email, so you can listen back, share with colleagues, and revisit some of the discussion points today. And a good time to tell you about our next webinar, which is taking place in May, and the subject of that is the power of movement, ways to strengthen mental health in the workplace. There will be a registration link in the chat box, or you can go to our website. And if you'd like to speak to one of our health and wellbeing specialists, please reach out to your account manager if you are a client of Westfield Health, or if not, contact us directly at businessinquiries@westfieldhealth.com. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope you got out of today's session as much as I did. Been a pleasure hosting it. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much for your time. Bye now.
Thank you all. Bye.